Good evening. Um, Chairwoman Walsh is having some type of technical difficulties. Um, Councilman Spadola, are you able to get the meeting started?
Sure. Give me 3 minutes to get situated here.
Okay, thank you.
WITN.
Yes, Councilman Spadola.
Thank you. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, you may begin when you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm James Spadola. I'll be stepping in tonight. This is the January 10th meeting of the Public Safety Committee. We will conduct a roll call to begin with. Councilmember Gray, are you present?
Present.
Councilmember Johnson?
Here.
And Council President Congo?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh? Okay, we will drive on in the meantime. First item on the agenda is Ordinance 21-055 to amend Chapter 37 of the City Code relating to the removal of abandoned vehicles within the city. Councilmember Linda Gray is the sponsor. Councilmember Gray, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, Co-Chair. Yes, this is an ordinance to amend Chapter 37. And really, a lot of the things in this ordinance are already in the code, like removal of abandoned cars from the street, cars that impede traffic. What this does is allow the Wilmington Police the authority to remove cars, abandoned cars, off of private property. I've had a lot of complaints, and the community has lodged a lot of addresses in alleys and in other backyards where people have just left their cars for years, days. It's a hazard for children. It's an example of urban blight. Sometimes it's blocking certain alleys, trash accumulates. There's a lot of different things associated with abandoned cars that does not help a community grow or look after itself or be proud of itself. So after 2 years of research, it turned out I spoke to the parking enforcement and they didn't have the authority to tow cars. And then I spoke to the police department and they didn't have the authority to tow cars on private property. It seemed to have been something in the state law that prohibited this. Well, when I brought it to the attention of the law department and the fact that there was a law in the county that allowed this, they were able to draw up this ordinance, which allows the Wilmington Police Department to tow cars on private property. There's many sections in here that are already, like I said, in the code, like towing cars that are in no parking, no standing, or no stopping zones. That's already something the police can do. You can't store abandoned cars on your property if it's a vacant lot. that was already in the code. So things like that are included. And for anyone that's interested, an abandoned car, it's pretty long, but it's a vehicle that is either inoperable, dismantled, wrecked, or which displays expired registration plates, which are at least 30 days expired, or which display no registration plates, or from which minor components have been removed, is in such a state of disrepair as to be incapable of being operated in the manner for which it was designed, and is situated on private property appearing to have been abandoned. There's a second one, which inoperable, dismantled, wrecked, or which displays expired registration. Basically, that just repeats it. So that's the basic meaning of abandoned car, abandoned vehicle. I have spoken to Chief Tracy, and he's not in objection to this. I think he may be on the line tonight. He says that they already answer a lot of calls about abandoned cars, but they haven't been able to do what they wanted to about them. And they already have a contractor. So this will not be a financial impact that tows cars for the Wilmington Police Department.
Thank you, Councilmember Gray.
And I think Councilman Spadola, you had asked to be a co-sponsor. I don't know if you're still doing that or.
Yes, I am listed as a co-sponsor. Are you done with your comments? I will.
Yes. For
sure.
question.
So I was happy to work on this legislation with Councilmember Gray. It took us some time to realize we were working on the same thing. But I began because Mrs. Akia Minka, who I hope was able to join us, the president of the East Lawn Civic Association, reached out about abandoned vehicles with visibly inflated airbags, broken windows on private property, which is an area of the state code that seemed to address it in a way that wasn't satisfactory to a lot of city departments to really deal with it. So as Councilmember Gray said, the county had a good version of the code, and this basically adopts that, giving the Wilmington Police the authority to after a process, remove the vehicle, which I think, you want to talk about helping remove blight. Nothing looks worse for a neighborhood than if there's a 1985 car with flat tires, busted windows, and inflated airbags. So this is a tool to help deal with that. So those are my comments, and I'd like to recognize Councilmember Oliver. Councilmember Darby has joined us. And I think
I'm up for comment. Thank you so much,
Sure.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Oliver, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to make a couple comments about this piece of legislation. I'm glad it did come up, but I just have a couple of comments because I did receive a couple of calls. This is not a criminal act, and I'm just surprised that this was in effect under Jim Baker, because I spoke to some PRIOs also, and the PRIOs do have the ability to remove cars because they've done it in the 3rd district for me. So I think this has been also negligence on the behalf of the administration, because Public Works, they used to get calls in PRIOs, and if they were out there, same thing, unregistered tags for such a period of time, they have towed cars. So I think this is really good, and I think I have to say it's negligence on the side of the administration, not to, if somebody's car is out there, someone seemed to me, they should have called the commissioner, maybe said something to the mayor's office, and just make it happen, because this already, but it wasn't qualified. So I get it. But the PRIOs do have the ability to do this, also Public Works. And the only complaint that I did receive was that, we add more onto the police station. So I was surprised you said that, Chief Tracy is in favor of this. I mean, we have so much crime going out there, and it's the same contractors that the PRIOs deal with. So I will be in support of this, but I would like a section to be added that we give Councilman Gray, that we give after a homeowner or whoever has been contacted, give them 5 days to respond, and another 5 days. Like if somebody's car is in their yard because they're trying to get money, or whatever, to get their car registered, give them a 5-day notice, and then you give them 5 days to go to motor vehicle to take care of it. And after 10 days, they're on their own. But just give them a 5-day, I guess a 10-day grace period, 5-day of notice that, XYZ, and the additional 5 days. So it doesn't look like it's a penalty, a piece of legislation with so much hard times going on right now. So I guess I would be in support of it if we give them, they make sure they get a notice of 5 days. I'm sure, it's been sitting there. We already know that. But so they can't say, oh, Gray and Spadola came up with this and now they're just towing people's cars. So if we could give them a 5-day notice and additional 5 days to try to rectify whatever the problem is. And that would be for the cases of individuals who are really trying to do the right thing. So they don't get caught up in this web of negligence or people doing, unnecessary, just keeping somebody's car for a friend who doesn't even live in the neighborhood. So if we can, just add that in here, and I guess Law can find the area to add it. And if not, I can easily say I can see it be added in section.
Councilmember Gray.
Yes, several things. Yes, the Prios are allowed to tow cars in certain situations. If they're impeding traffic, if they look a certain way and they're on a public street, but the police were not allowed to tow on private property. So I agree with Councilwoman Oliver that cars could be towed by Public Works and by the Prios, but those circumstances did not include private property. And also, I think it says 7 days. It's not 10 days.
That's why I'm only asking for additional 3 more. So from 7 to 10, someone called and said, look, I can see a 5-day notice and can you give me 5 more days? So I just said I would, ask that on the floor. So I don't think it would break anything for additional 3 days for a resident. So we can try to assist them, all residents, if that's okay with you, Councilwoman Gray.
I don't have a problem with that. I don't see what 3 days will make a big difference one way or the other. So I don't have a problem with it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
I would like to be added as a co-sponsor as well. I know I've been aware of this legislation, and I'm glad the talks have gotten where they are in terms of actually taking action. This is a huge problem in the 7th district, where we have a large amount of auto body shops even, and then private homes as well, that have vehicles on them. So it was the most frustrating thing, I think, when I got a council is, making the call and then, being told by L&I that there was nothing they could do because it was on private property. So I have no objection to any amendment of notice period. The bottom line is these vehicles need to either get the proper registration or be fixed, because they are a blight to many neighborhoods, especially on the west side. So, this is really good legislation. And thank you very much, Councilwoman Gray, for taking the lead on this, as this is very important to rebuild our streets and our neighborhoods. And I guess the only other question I had, and this is more for Councilmember Gray, is are we going to do the same procedure where it'll be L&I towing, or are we going to have a private tow company? I was just thinking about the legal effect of it, but maybe that's a talk for a different day.
I can address that. Only the police department will be able to notify and authorize towing. Only the Wilmington Police Department.
Okay, so it won't be a private tow company.
Well, the Chief Tracy said that they have a private tow company. Because I was looking at, could we sell the cars for scrap metal if people don't claim them? And part of the towing company is that if someone doesn't claim the car, they get it for towing and for the storage fees. So we already have a company that does that for the police department. And Chief Tracy said they're already answering these calls to address Councilwoman Oliver's question about giving the police department more work to do. He says they're already responding to the calls. They get them. He's been working with Captain Akil in the first district, because there, like you said, in the other districts, there are a lot of cars that are parked in alleyways and they're blocking driving and kids are playing in them. So the police have been addressing the problem before.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Thank
Council.
you.
Chairwoman Walsh is here, and I'm going to turn back the meeting to her. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Spadola. I appreciate you taking the time. I apologize to everybody. I have no idea what goes on with these units that I keep getting, but I'm sure I have something to do with it. So I apologize to everybody for being late. Councilmember Gray?
Yes, I think there are other.
Yolanda.
Okay,
Pardon?
Councilmember McCoy?
Thank you. Well, first, I actually wanted to be recognized being on the meeting. I think I might have been here probably first. And then second, I just wanted to state that I wanted to ask the question about the police getting those calls. I'm sure that they have it. I think I've made more than one. And when it comes to the what is that? The towing company that they're using, like what criteria do they have in order to make certain that they're using? Because I've actually had my neighbor be blocked into his garage, and I basically got it was almost as though he had to pay for the towing in order to get someone so he can get out of his garage and go along his merry way. So I just wanted to make certain that we got that cleared up, that wouldn't be any type of any fee or anything to the person who needed to get it towed. I just wanted to make certain that, because I didn't see that, but I just wanted to be certain that that wasn't the case.
Councilmember Gray?
I'm not quite understanding. Are you saying that he was waiting to have his car towed and was blocked in by the tow company?
No,
Or
yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, someone parked in front of his garage. He is probably my only neighbor that actually parks in his garage, and someone parked in front of it. He could not leave his house. And as we made the phone calls to try to get the truck towed, I got a lot of feedback. It took me half the day, and I finally found out who it was. They put a U-Haul behind his in our alleyway, and it blocked his garage. So I made calls to U-Haul, to the cops, everybody, and it took me hours to get that moved. So I just wanted to make certain when the police are called, not just to put another ticket on it, because that's another thing they do. They do put tickets on it, but they left the cars for a day or two before the towing actually took place. That happened with a handicap spot as well. So I'm just wanted to make certain that this ordinance will actually be enforced, because I would like to be put on it. I just want to make certain this ordinance is actually going to be enforced.
there is a section in here that explicitly states, and it was in the code, it's not new, that if a car is blocking a public roadway or a private roadway that someone uses, the car can be towed. That's not new, and I can't find it right now, but it's in here.
Right. Now, I've actually, thank you so much, Councilwoman Gray. I tried to take on this information and make people aware of all of the ordinances that dealt with parking and such. So thank you so much for taking on this endeavor. And I would also like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you.
Councilmember Darby?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I'm in support of removing cars on private property that aren't working. People are in the use of them. I am in full support of that. However, my concern is that I don't think an armed person should be responding to abandoned cars on private or public property. So this is where I think the conversation about community response teams, having different people who aren't armed to respond to these type of calls that police are getting, so that they can actually focus on violent crimes that they need to be focused on, instead of things like abandoned cars on private property. So that's where my issue is drawn, is that I am for decreasing police interaction with people, because we know that police interaction increases police violence and police brutality, especially in Black and brown neighborhoods. That's just stats, statistics, data, can't be argued. So that is like my only issue, is that it's through the police department. So I really look forward and hope that in the future that we could, once we get a community response team, take away nonviolent calls that the police are getting and give it to another department, another team to handle things
Okay,
like this.
stay,
Because this is not
Councilmember
for the
Darby,
police
stay with it.
department. I am sticking with it. Don't talk over me. I'm done.
I can address that. Unfortunately, the
Councilmember
state
Gray.
has, pardon me?
You're going to answer the question?
Yes, please. Unfortunately, the state had something in their law that prohibited other jurisdictions from towing vehicles on private property. And because it was a state law or a state code, the authority could only be given to another police authority. That's my understanding. So that's the reason it went to the police department and the policemen rather than the parking enforcement or meter maids or anyone like that. That was the reason I understand that the police have to handle it.
Thank
Anything
you.
on private property, from my background in law, is very, very important to the Constitution and to people's rights. So usually you need a higher authority to go on someone's property, in someone's home, on their property. That is a sacred area.
Councilmember Fields?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to be recognized as attending a meeting. Council Member Gray, thank you for bringing this up. Like Council Member Johnson said, on the West Side, we are basically plagued with, abandoned cars. We even have tires thrown in the back of alleyways and different things like that next to the car. We have a lot of people working on abandoned cars or people sleeping in abandoned cars. So I do appreciate you bringing this legislation up. My question to you is, I know that you said the Wilmington Police Department, they will be handling it, but would it be through the traffic division? Would the traffic division be the ones actually, looking at it, enforcing it, and then having the cars towed, rather than like detectives or police officers that are already stationed throughout the community?
On mute. I really cannot answer that question. I know in the past when we've had a problem, I've called Captain Akil for my district, and he's dispatched the police that are on duty at that time. Of course, they don't tow the cars, but they go to look at what the situation is and get back to me. I don't know if Chief Tracy's still on. He was, but I can't answer that question. Sorry.
Okay. I'm going to ask because I know that the department has their own traffic unit. Because me and Council Member Field, we met with them about what was going on in the 8th and the 5th district as far as parking and things like that, and they were very helpful. So it might be if we utilize them versus using the other police, then it wouldn't be such a problem, to get this done and not taking anyone from their post. But again, I do like the legislation. Thank you very much. And I'll just follow. Can you follow up and see, if they'll be using that department?
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Gray, there's a technicality on this bill right now, and that is when Councilmember Oliver requested that the days be increased to 10, that actually has to be a motion to amend the legislation. And so that when it's passed out of committee and at the council meeting itself, it will have to be a substitute ordinance. So if you could make the motion to add that as part of, actually, Councilmember Oliver should make the motion since she requested it.
Is she a committee member?
I don't have to be a committee member to request to add a motion to a piece of legislation. So I do move the motion to add the 10-day notice to ordinance
0111.
Thank you. I'm looking for it. 0111. I'd like to move a motion to add, oh, here it is. I'm sorry. Here it is, you're right. I have a 021005. Ordinance 0.
That's ordinance 21055.
Correct. Thank you. I'd like to move a motion to add the 10-day notice on there.
Is there a second from a committee member?
I'll second it. But let's clarify, the 10 days is going where it says,
Well, you have 7.
the 10 days is going to go, let me see, it's D, it's under D, it's section 37-126D. The last sentence the sentence says, last known address, remove such vehicle within 7, it should be 10 days from the date of the mailing. If the vehicle is not removed within, says 7, should say 10 days if the owner cannot be located for the purpose. So I second it, but that's the exact place it should go.
All those in favor from the committee say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Thank you,
Sure.
Councilmember.
Councilwoman Walsh, I apologize. It's Marshall. Dan's mic was muted. And you have to be a member of the committee to make the motion.
That's what I said. Yeah. Sorry.
My apologies. Dan was trying to unmute. He couldn't unmute. So I apologize for interrupting without having my hand up.
Well, if we can change it, since I just explained where it goes, I will
Well,
spell.
also, I want to argue with Marshall about that just a little bit. Marshall, a motion should be able to be made by anybody that's attending a meeting, period. It just can't be moved and seconded, or it can't be seconded by anybody on that. And it can't be voted on by other non-committee members.
Is anyone from the law department on here?
Where is our attorney?
Wow.
Hi, Councilwoman Gray, Chairwoman Walsh. Sorry, I was able to fix my computer. This is Daniel Walker. In accordance with the recent Robert Rules of Order, it does stipulate that motions must be made by voting members of the committee, and as such, it has to be a committee member who makes the motion.
All right, I'll defer to you.
Are we going to defer to that I have made the motion and read it?
Councilwoman Gray, you can make the motion and it can be seconded by another committee member.
Well, I have made the motion. I read it into the record. So I guess now it's up for a second.
Second.
Thank you.
Moved and seconded. Once again, without repeating everything that has been done, but it will be increased to 10 days. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Continue on the anyone who has comments about the legislation itself. Seeing none from council members,
Can I make one last comment?
yeah, you'll get the last word on this legislation, council member.
Okay.
It's yours. I do not see any, and somebody correct me if it's wrong.
There's three hands up. on
There
public.
are,
Right.
okay. I'm sorry, I can't see any of them.
Madam Chair, this is WITN. We had a William Majette Jr.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question. They were talking about Councilman Gray, Prios. What's that?
Prius.
Yeah, what are those? What is that?
Oh, the meter maids, as they used
Oh,
to be called.
meeting. Okay. And then the second question is it 10 calendar days or 10 business days?
It doesn't address it in the ordinance, but usually legally it's 10 business days.
10 business days, okay. Thank
But
you.
I'm saying it doesn't state it in the ordinance.
So then you would assume that it's 10 calendar days?
I would assume if it was my car, it was 10 calendar days.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a third one.
I think he is done.
Okay.
Next, we have Hanif Salam.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
And my name is Hanif Salam, First District resident. And I can appreciate this ordinance when it truly comes to abandoned cars and ones that are being misused or unused. But being a current car owner, needing work, like my car hasn't had a tag on it in about 90 days. I just want to be clear, if the owner of the car does contact and says, yes, this is my car, but I'm waiting to get repairs, that I don't just have 10 days. Like right now, I see it may take me 6 months to get my car fixed, but I don't want to have to worry about having to deal with the police. But yeah, I mean, my car is not a blight. It's a great car. It just needs some work right now. So I want to ensure like my car ain't going to be took just because it need work. And that's honestly me. I didn't even come here for this, to this meeting for this, but if I can get that question answered, that would be great.
Councilmember Gray.
I'm going to speculate that if the car is registered and tagged, it would not be considered abandoned because you're attempting to get it fixed.
My car is not currently registered and tagged. I dropped the insurance because I'm waiting to get the money to fix it. So therefore, it's not being driven. It is parked on personal property, and it does not have a insurance or a tag on it currently. And my question is, with this ordinance, does that then get a right to police to take my car, although I am not driving it, I am not using it, I'm just waiting to get the money to fix it?
Yes.
Yes, I would say yes. Unless, can it be seen? Do you have a garage or a shelter?
Where it's parked right now, it can be seen.
I think it would qualify under this. I would think the police department, if you had proof, I would think that they would not have the car towed. I mean, people are human. We understand, especially during COVID and monetary problems, that people are caught in these situations. But unfortunately, there are too many people that are not like you who just have some type of, I don't know, attachment to the car, or maybe they're using the parts for other cars, but it's becoming a real blight situation in the First District.
I can appreciate that. And I just would ask that people are asked to be sympathetic, as you just said. Like, I have the title, I can show ownership.
Well, I would think you would get ahead of this and maybe call your local policeman, the policeman in your district, and show them proof that you're attempting to get the car fixed. I mean, are you waiting for a part or something? You don't have to tell me now, but I'm just saying I would kind of be proactive.
And I could appreciate that, but for just others, like I said, I'm just happy to be on this meeting. So when this becomes law, there may be others who are just not even aware, and then they have ownership of their car and be in a situation like this. You know what I mean? So I could appreciate it, and I thank you for the advice and answer to the question.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
No, I was just saying if you could see my hand up.
Councilman Oliver.
Thank you. Just to speak on with the resident who just spoke, just said, and just to hear what he just said, that was my point, that we don't want some people to get caught up into this web because of hard times right now. You know, just what's going on naturally. I mean, no need to speak about it. But for a person like that who's saying, look, you can see my car, I'm waiting on some parts. I don't think right now financially I'm going to be able to have my car fixed for another 6 months. And for us to say, well, call the police and be proactive, I think it's just something to think about. I understand this legislation, but I can see some people such as Mr. Salam being caught in the middle where he's like, look, my car is not registered. I'm being honest, I can't afford it right now. And for you to say, call the police and be proactive, I just think it's going to be a trickle effect. And I understand the legislation. I get it, and it is needed. And it's horrible that some people will get caught up in this. Like he said, here's just, I mean, it's been broke down for 2 months. I think we're talking about cars that's just been sitting there for years and months and months and months. But however, I just would like the sponsors to realize that you're going to have some people in situations like this with some hardships because of whatever the circumstances are. So just be ready for them phone calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Anyone else have anything to say?
Madam Chair.
Councilmember McCoy.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted just to add to that. So from what I'm understanding, this is basically about private property. Now, as I've been making these phone calls, because I've had quite a few, what I've been told is because it's private property, the owner is the one who has to call to get a car towed off of private property. The police do not just go and tow cars off of private property. That's the first thing they let us know. Oh, it's private. The owner has to make that call or whatever. So I've been told that repeatedly, and I just wanted to make sure that that was kind of where we were, because this is the reason why I feel this is necessary, because there's a lot of times we have a lot of parking lots and stuff that are not quite being used that frequently. And so people are just leaving their old junker cars at like old warehouses. I've seen them at the old Browns Mansion near the MVF building, all of these places here within my district where they're not really, these buildings are no longer being occupied. They're leaving their cars, but they're still considered private property because someone owns them. So I just wanted to make certain that the public knows that this is where the issue lies. We're seeing a bunch of junk cars that stay, and the city really can't do much about it because these cars are on private property. If they're on the street, we can get we can get the Prius and let them know that this is an abandoned car and it's sat here so long, and they'll mark the tires and put something on the windshield or whatever and let people know that they're coming for it. But on private property, their hands were tied. So I just wanted to make certain that people had that understanding.
So your understanding is the police will not take a car off of private property unless the owner gives them permission to do so?
That was my understanding. We had to make the owner call in order to move something off of private property. So the Prius would not touch any car, no matter how junked up it was, if it was sitting in a parking lot on private property.
Right. Well, that part is correct. Yes. Right. But with this, right. It's not, this is not. So
that's the reason why I support this legislation, because all of those parking lots that don't have any real use at the very moment, we were getting a lot of junked and trash cars where people knew that they can leave it there and no one would touch it. So that's the reason why I really support this ordinance.
Yes, but I guess what I was missing from what you were saying is that the police wouldn't be able to go onto a private property if it was complaint driven.
So I think my question more so is that if Mr. Hanif, if his car is in someone's space or whatever, if no one is calling about it, I don't think that no one would bother it. The thing is that we've been calling at a lot of these abandoned cars and their hands have been tied.
No, I fully understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is if I live on that street where Mr. Hanif's car is, and if it bothers me every day, like that one car has been sitting there for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months,
right?
And I decided to file a complaint on it, the police, yes, indeed, are going to answer that complaint without the owner's permission. But it's a two-way street too, because it could be that the car that doesn't have the plates on it is simply trying to avoid the parking enforcement people too.
Right. Okay. So, I'm sorry, someone said something on chat about someone from the law department being on Zoom.
It's probably to make a ruling on the amendment.
Okay. No, that just came up, so I didn't know whether or not they were talking about that. But so then what Mr. Hanif stating is actually more so relevant, because you're stating that if no one calls or whatever, and if the police just keep seeing his car parked there for like a month or two, whatever, then they can just, if they get out the car and take a look or whatever, then they can just tow it if they like.
Well, I don't think
if it's
the police-
abandoned. I mean, if it doesn't have tags on it, is what I'm saying. Not just to tow a car.
I think the police, without it being driven by a complaint, though, Councilwoman, I think they have enough on their plate every day when they get in that car.
That's what I was stating. Like it's mostly been complaints, but okay.
Councilmember Council President Congo.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that I understand the legislation. I have a couple concerns. So someone from the public the community can call and make complaints about a vehicle that's on someone else's private property. And what recourse does the owner of that car have to justify that the car shouldn't be towed? And I guess I'm looking for like timelines, because we keep throwing dates out there, like a month or two. But what determines if a car can be towed? And can the community call on a neighbor who has their car on their private property because it's been there for however long, and that car can be towed? I'm confused around that part. Maybe I missed it. Just like in Mr. Salam's case, could his neighbors call and complain about his car, and his car could possibly be towed? And if so,
Yes.
am I reading into that wrong?
Councilmember Gray.
Yes, I can't read the whole legislation over during the meeting, but there are all types of conditions. It says, if an abandoned, and I read the definition of abandoned car to begin with, so you have to fit that definition first. And if you fit the definition, it says if an abandoned vehicle is on private property with the consent of the owner or occupant thereof, or if an abandoned vehicle is owned by the owner occupant of the private property where the vehicle is located, representatives of the police may enter upon the property where such vehicle is located to ascertain its ownership. The police shall notify the owner of the abandoned vehicle by certified mail to the owner's last known address to remove such vehicle within 10 days from the date of mailing. If the vehicle is not removed within 10 days, or if the owner cannot be located for the purpose of sending the written notice, then representatives of the police may enter upon the property where the vehicle is located and conspicuously affix thereupon a sticker or a tag showing the time and date of its affixing, and advising the owner that if the vehicle is not removed within 24 hours from the time of the affixing of the sticker, the vehicle shall be removed to a storage area designed by the police. This subsection shall not apply to the automobile graveyard, blah, blah, blah. Or any vehicle on private property which is not visible from the street or road or alley and is not otherwise a nuisance or health or fire hazard. I think that's to President Congo's question.
Yeah, honestly, that was kind of confused. Didn't really help. I'm still kind of confused.
Basically, yes. If basically the way this is written, and my intent was, if your community and neighbors think that your car is abandoned, then someone from the police department will come out and assess it. And if it is, they'll give you a notification to remove it, or I guess bring it up to standard, just like with L&I. And if you don't do that, you'll get legal notices, and eventually it will be towed if you don't comply. And I understand with almost every law, there's someone that's caught in it unintentionally, but I don't see any other way that we can get rid of abandoned cars on private property. And private property is alleys. We have a lot of alleys in the 1st District that people have just parked their car there, and people can barely use the alley, and it's owned by the property owners. It's not owned by the city. It's not owned by one person. It's a group of people. So they can't get together and do anything about it, hire a towing company. So yes, I admit some people may get caught in it, and hopefully the police officers investigating will be sympathetic to concerns based on economics and the lack of parts.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure that I'm not sure if you're able to see, but there are several members from the community who haven't had a chance to speak yet, plus someone from law is on. I'm not sure that'll clear up some of the concerns of council or the community.
I saw Tanny's hand up also.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And there recently added people that put their hands up too.
Yeah.
Councilmember Gray, and I think you've pointed this out several times. If somebody is in the situation that's being presented to us right now, then it is their responsibility to be proactive with the police department to let them know what's going on. And that way, I think if you have an open communication with the police officers, you'll probably come down on the better side of them. So, Ms. Washington, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say that the attorney, our attorney, John Hawley, is on the line. He's had his hand up for some time and he would like to speak to the issue.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Hawley?
Yes, thank you, Council President, or excuse me, Committee Chairperson. So as I think Councilwoman Gray associated, the legislation as drafted does not change the definition of what an abandoned vehicle is. There are several kind of breakdowns of the definition of abandoned vehicles. The major changes on this was to align the city code with the state code. As Councilperson Gray mentioned, there was a gap in the state code, which, we and our city code where we could address vehicles abandoned, that were considered abandoned, by definition, that were parked on the roadway, or vehicles that were considered abandoned that were on private property with that property's owner's permission. So I know there was a comment about, these private parking lots. Wilmington Police could always address that. The PREOs, the parking regulation enforcement officers, can't go onto private property to enforce city of Wilmington public, parking restrictions. That was always a Wilmington Police Department thing, and that was an agreement in the state code. The gap in our code, the city code and the state code, was that abandoned vehicles on private property with the property owner's consent was a gap where the city police were not able to enter onto that property to ascertain the ownership of the vehicle and to address the issue, nor were PREOs. And if we were to call under state code, it was left to state police or the state Department of Homeland Security. However, if a call was made to the state, we at the law department, we called the state and the state said, oh no, the Wilmington Police can do that. But the law as it's written conspicuously left out the Wilmington Police Department. So really the major changes that are made by this legislation are to section 37-126, which enables the Wilmington Police Department, who have the resources to ascertain a vehicle based on the VIN number of the vehicle or the license plate of the vehicle, to ascertain who is the owner. Because if you're aware, once a vehicle registration is expired for a period of time, that registration number, so if your license plate is 1234, that license plate is reissued and maybe issued to another person. So the registration information may not actually have the current owner's information, and it may be assigned to somebody else. But the VIN number that's also registered at the DMV can say, oh, that vehicle was last registered to Jane Smith, who resides at whatever street. So that way they can affect notice. Towing, the Wilmington Police, they can't just show up and tow the vehicle right away. It would be handled by the city's towing contractor. So they would still have, and after this notice period that we're changing to 10 days. So the towing, they may, Wilmington Police will be required to do the notice. However, the actual towing would just be the city's towing contractor, whoever that contractor may be, that we have contracted with. I think that is all of your questions. I'm happy to answer any more questions if any more come up.
Thank you, Mr. Hawley.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Gray, did you have a question of the attorney?
Yes, I did. Someone from the public, I think Mr. Majette, wanted to know if the 10 days was 10 business days or 10 consecutive days.
Usually when it's 10 days, it's 10 calendar days.
10 calendar. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Oliver?
Yes,
Councilman?
yes, lastly, when I have a question to the sponsor, just to follow up from Councilman Brigada Fields, when she stated, is this the traffic department or will any police officer be able to come out? And if I call my neighbor, any officer, or would this be directed for to the traffic department? Or it doesn't make a difference? That was a good question.
Was that a question for me, councilperson?
Sure.
As written, it's just to the police department. I would resist allocating police resources via legislation. That would be up to, that's kind of an administrative decision to be made by the Wilmington Police Department. I don't know enough about the department and how they allocate their officers' resources.
And the only reason why I stated that was I want to make this clear that also would lead to an officer coming in the neighborhood who knows, has a friend and a friend of a friend and get somebody else's car towed. I mean, that's just some things just to think about. Not that that would happen, but I don't put nothing past people nowadays. Thank you.
I understand. I think part of that would be alleviated. There is the notice requirements. There are notice requirements under the city code as well as the state code for when towing companies tow vehicles that they're required to provide notice. And there's also notice provisions that are provided under the city code for when a vehicle before it is towed as well as after it has been removed. So that should eliminate any of that funky, I'm going to go tow Jim's car because I don't like Jim.
Okay, could somebody tell me if there are other people signed up and other people who have not spoken before?
Yes.
Councilmember Spadola?
Yes, I see Mrs. Zakia Minka is next.
I'm sorry, who is it?
Zakia Minka.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good. This is Zakia Minka. I'm the president of the East Lawn Civic Association. And this issue has been coming up in our Civic Association meetings for over 4 years. And back some years ago, like they said, with the Baker administration, we put in a complaint because there were so many cars on private property in the alleyways. Yeah. And they actually came and they towed 19 cars from our neighborhood. But then when how people will move out and other people move in, and then all of a sudden a lot of cars have accumulated again. And we did go to the police department administration license and inspection to ask them to remove. And that's when they were telling us that it was against the law for the police department to go on private property to remove a car. And that's why I initiated trying to get legislation to match the state and the county, because I mean, I have a lot of friends who live in the county in like Middletown, Newcastle, and they don't have that problem. I'm like, if they don't have that problem, then why should the city have that problem? And so I am very, very thrilled that that piece of legislation is on the table. And I believe that I know that it will solve one of the long range problems in my neighborhood, and I'm sure in a lot of other people's neighborhood also. So I thank you so very much for this legislation, and I pray that it will pass with flying colors so that we can get rid of the blight in our neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Gray, you want the last word?
Yes.
Hi, Madam Chair, this is Daniel Walker. We do have Sabira Ibrahim signed up to offer public comment as well, and a few others after that.
Good evening. My name is Sabira Ibrahim, and I am a representative at the Neighborhood Planning Council in the 1st District. I'm sitting in on the meeting because this has been an issue in our district as well as everywhere else. We've had times where I've been called to do community walks with different civic associations, and the abandoned vehicles have been a big problem. Some of the problem is that, you know, a homeowner don't always live in the home. It could be a rental property. And the abandoned building is, car is sitting on the property of the rental property, not tagged, not registered or licensed, but there was no way to remove the vehicle. Even, you know, we couldn't even check to see if the people lived in the house. This legislation is very important. I do have concerns about, you give them 10 days, but then what happens? You send them the citation, then they say they didn't get the citation, and then you go, what, another 10 days? I'm just hoping as we move forward with this particular legislation that we sort of clean up the loose ends. I do know we had something like this going on under the Mayor Seals administration, and here in the 1st District, we towed about 50 cars. And it was just that these cars were on private property. They were not tagged. They were given a notice. They had so much time to remove the vehicle, or the vehicle was towed. And I don't know if 10 days is enough time to give somebody time to handle the property. But I can't remember how long we gave the people time to move their vehicles. But that might be a consideration, giving them 30 days to remove the vehicle. If not, the vehicle would be removed. So I just don't, I'm for it, but I'm just hoping that we can tie up some of the other loose ends. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina Kay.
Thank you. My name is Christina Kelly. I am in support to an extent. I think it's a great concept. I think the idea behind it is fantastic and is definitely something that needs to be taken care of. But I think, you know, we've already heard a few instances where it's kind of going to leave a little bit of a gray area. You know, community police relations are already kind of on edge. And not to mention, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So, you know, say somebody's car gets marked, or, you know, they've got, you know, their 10-day notice sitting at their house, but they've been in the hospital for the last 15 days and have no clue what's going on. It just sounds like there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of, I've heard a lot of, I hope so, or I would think, or I would hope. But that doesn't do much to ease the tensions that are already here in the community, you know, between the community members and police and the police department. You've had a few examples brought up where I think there needs to be a little bit more like set in stone here. It sounds like, again, there's a lot of gray area. Then there's also the concern, you know, Councilwoman Darby brought up. Why are we having armed individuals coming onto somebody's private property to discuss a vehicle? It's setting things up to be more escalation and more issues between community members. And
Ms. Kelly,
I'm sorry, I still have a minute and 26 seconds.
well, you have the amount of time that actually we decide you have. And if you want to speak to the legislation that's before us.
I'm speaking to the legislation, Council Chair. I'm speaking to the legislation.
This is a committee meeting concerning this legislation.
And I'm speaking to the legislation. So as I stated,
no, you're doing supposition.
I'm concerned as a community member, as a business owner in the community, I am concerned that there is a lot of gray area being mentioned with this legislation as I'm speaking to the legislation. Again, I think when there's already increased tensions between the community members and Wilmington Police Department, things like this with so many gray areas that have been mentioned, not just by community members, but even by other council members, it sounds like it needs a little bit more attention. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak uninterrupted. Have a wonderful day.
Oh. Brandon Fletcher. Brandon Fletcher.
Hi, thank you, Chairwoman Walsh, for allowing me to give public comment today. I'm speaking in regards to the ordinance to amend Chapter 37 related to the removal of abandoned vehicles in the city. I think that the vehicles that are abandoned are an eyesore, and that this legislation does have some good points as it comes to the comfort and well-being of the public, to make our city more beautiful. And I thank Council members Spadola and Gray for introducing this. However, my concerns come about the part that includes the City of Wilmington Police from enforcing state law related to abandoned vehicles on private property. And I think to that end, we need to continue to come up with solutions that change how police engage with the communities and what they should be responding to. We're asking our
Mr.
officers.
Fletcher, that has nothing to do with that, with this legislation.
Reclaiming my time. To that end, we need to change how police officers engage with communities and what they should be responding to.
Mr. Fletcher, either stay on point or give up your time.
Can I please finish
No,
uninterrupted?
not if you're going to keep going off point. No, you
Okay.
cannot finish. Address the
Well,
legislation.
police officers, if this passes, police officers will be responding. And so I'm talking about the need to what they should be responding to, and that we are asking our officers to do far too much, and it has been detrimental to police, community, and how they interact. I think that the city must continue to divest from the policing as a one-stop solution to a community pops up with this
You are
ordinance.
again going off point.
And instead invest in supportive
Nothing
services
but statements
so that
rather than
people's
facts.
basic needs are met and that we can have real safety in our community. I just do not think that we need to continue to invest in police officers responding to things that they have.
Mr. Fletcher,
no-
I don't want to ask the time master to have to turn your time off. Either stick with the legislation or give up your time.
I thought public comment was for the public, but
it's not
thank you and
free
have a
for
good
all.
day. Thank you, and have a good night.
You're welcome. Keandra McDowell, please.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Keandra McDowell. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. My comment on this legislation is there any way that we could figure out a way to stop putting so much work on our police officers so that they can actually go out to scenes and handle the job that they need to do? Couldn't this be something that goes to like parking enforcement or something of that nature instead of going directly to Wilmington Police? Our police already wear many hats.
The sponsor will probably answer that when she does her wrap up. Ms. McDowell, thank you for your time. Okay. Ms. Gray, you're the main sponsor. You want to have the last word?
For the umpteenth time, it is state law that requires that the police department, armed policemen, respond to private property. Private property is the sanction of our Constitution, and in the law, it usually takes a higher authority to go onto private property. Like a search warrant for property is a much higher standard than a search warrant for a car or a person. So in our state, it has to be a police officer. And I agree with the people who say that we need to diverse so the police department doesn't have to answer all concerns. But in this instance, the state is the controller of this. So it's nothing we can do about this instance. And I do agree that police shouldn't have to answer these type of things. But talking to Chief Tracy, he says they answer it anyway. Every time someone calls about an abandoned car, someone has to go out and look into the situation. So they're already going into the community to look at these cars. The other point was to Councilwoman McCoy. This is the answer to your question about someone parked an abandoned car, technically parked on private property. In the event that a vehicle is abandoned or parked within a private right-of-way, alleyway, or easement in a manner to impede the flow of traffic at the complaint of any property owner, occupant, or other person with a right of passage across the private right-of-way, alleyway, or easement, such vehicle may be caused to be removed by the police in the manner provided in this section, except that the posting required in the subsection B of this section may be omitted, and the provisions of this chapter shall be applied to said parked vehicle as if it were an abandoned vehicle. So that answers the question. If you're impeding someone's garage or their alley and they can't get out, or you happen to be visiting them and you can't get out, you can call the police and they can have the car towed without notifying them.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I think I've answered most questions, hopefully, and I don't think there's a lot of gray areas left. The attorney answered the question that it's 10 consecutive days.
We now need an amendment to move this, or I mean, a resolution. We need a
motion.
Council member to, I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, I said we need a motion, right?
A motion, yes. And make sure when the motion is being done, that you refer to this as the amended.
Oh, okay. Well, I make a motion that we vote on ordinance 21-055 amended to move this out of committee meeting.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Need a second.
Opposed?
Oh, we didn't get a second, I guess, on my
Oh,
motion.
that's right, we didn't, I'm sorry. Is there a second to it?
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Okay, is emergency management here to address the grant application? Is the administration going to address this?
Madam Chair,
Chairwoman Walsh, it seems like we have lost Chief of Staff Washington.
Okay.
we do have Willie Patrick on the line.
Well, that's who would be addressing this. Correct?
I see Director Patrick has become visible. He is on the line, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Patrick, are you going to address this issue?
Let's be on mute.
This is a resolution concerning emergency funds for the Emergency Management Agency.
Yes. I'm sorry, let me, my mantle clock, which doesn't keep correct time, just went off. Yes, I will be addressing the grant application for the emergency management performance grant.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, so yes, so this is a pass-through grant from FEMA to DEMA to the City of Wilmington for the administration and operation of the Emergency Operations Center. This is a $237,000 grant with a 50% in-kind match. That match is achieved through the budgeted funds already budgeted in the emergency operations budget. So there's no fiscal impact. As I stated, this is an annual grant that is for the purpose of for administration and operation of the Emergency Operations Center. It's for the day-to-day operations and to be able to provide funding for emergency activations.
And there will be no matching funds. You don't have a fiscal note attached to this because they're not necessary, correct?
That's correct.
because
Right.
the matching funds are already in the budget.
Right. So Madam Chair, so essentially what happens is that because it is a pass-through grant, if you notice on my budget, my budget is 50% is down to, how should I say it? I am budgeted 50% of through city funds. The other funds comes through the emergency manager performance grant. So in essence, if I buy a widget for $20, $10 comes from the city budget, and then I get reimbursed $10 from the emergency management performance grant.
Okay. Questions from council members?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Oliver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're saying that this grant is strictly to assist with the Office of Emergency Management. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Patrick?
It is.
Oh, good for you. I think it's overdue that the Emergency Management Office gets some funding due to the last flood we had over 11th Street Bridge, and you had to, basically work with the state, which was good, in the city for assisting the residents over there, and you didn't really have a pot of your own to do some of the necessary things that you needed to do. So this is a step in the right direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Oliver. And like I said, this is annual. This is a grant that we receive every year for the administration of the office.
Right. I knew I was just saying that's good. Thank you. And hopefully during the budget hearing, you should get some more money, because I know this was annual. I was just saying it's good for you to be able to refurnish your funding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other council member have any comments? Well, Director Patrick, you seem to have gotten off pretty easy here. Nobody needs to vote on anything because it's a resolution. So we'll just present this at the next council meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We have two presentations this evening. The first presentation is going to be presented by, on behalf of the first respondents, mental health issues. Could you please identify yourself, identify the company that you're with, and or why ever you're here? Maybe you're just here as a private citizen. And you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Amy Kivas. I am the executive director of a small nonprofit called Partners in Public Safety Solutions. But the work that I'm doing tonight, the presentation that I'll be presenting to council, and thank you for inviting me, is on responder mental health. And so my experience comes to you as a police officer. I was a police officer for over 20 years with the Newcastle County Police, and then I retired and went to work for the state's mental health division as the Director of Emergency Services for the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. And so I developed a keen interest and understanding of mental health and trauma and exposure to trauma. So Councilman Spadola and I are friends from when we were both on the street. We had a conversation and he said he thought that this would be something interesting to present to council. So thank you again for inviting me, and I'm here to talk to you today about responder wellness and care for the caretakers or the helpers. Next slide, please. So in 2017, the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act was passed into Congress and signed into law. So we know that throughout the presentation or throughout the comments tonight, we know that police are being asked to do more than they've been asked to do in the past. Their actions are continually questioned and viewed with suspicion. And so they've got a stressful job, which is made more stressful by public distrust and negative public opinion, which is putting the risks of their wellness at more risk. So they're having more physical manifestations due to the stress that they're experiencing. And incidentally, this can apply to anybody. I've done this presentation for not just police officers, but for lawyers, for nurses, teachers, paramedics, doctors, and all sorts of folks that are out in the field doing emergency work and being exposed to trauma. So next slide, please. One of the things that I talk about in relation to this presentation for the groups that I present to is addiction. And I've cut this down considerably for the time frame that I've been asked to present inside of. And one of the things I talk about is the opioid epidemic and how that has created additional stressors for emergency responders in a variety of forums that they work inside of. And so COVID is another thing that has added some stressors. But one of the things I try to explain to folks that are listening to the presentation is a better understanding of addiction and what addiction is. And we have many, many folks in our communities these days that are addicted to not just illicit drugs, but also to prescription drugs. And this is putting many of our emergency responders at a higher risk of burnout and stress. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight here on this slide is how drug use affects our brain. And I think when we think about the best course of treatment for individuals with drug addiction, we all think that they need to go be put into an inpatient facility for 30 days and then they'll be all better. But if we look at this slide, we see that the brain on the far left, which is very brightly lit up with yellow and red, is a brain that has had no drug use. If we scan all the way over to the far right, we see a brain that has been using cocaine, but it's been almost 3 months and then a couple of days past drug use. And we see that the brain still is not regenerated to the point that it's functioning normally. And I think for many folks who think that substance abuse is maybe a moral failing or a character flaw that we just need to kind of encourage them to stop, I think this gives real credence to the fact that addiction is a brain disease and it affects the functions of our brain. So it's not as simple as just stopping use. It really does take a long period of time, much longer than a 30-day inpatient stay, to get that brain functioning normally again. Next slide, please. And so how do these calls affect first responders and certainly police? As police officers and emergency responders and judges and lawyers and other individuals that are dealing with substance use disorders and other mental health maladies, we are deeply affected by these. We're repeatedly exposed to trauma. And so we know that trauma changes the way our brain operates. We know the ACEs study, which is a very well-documented study about repeated traumatic exposures with children and how that affects their brain development. And so these repeated exposures to traumatic events can be traumatizing to first responders as well. Also, the risk of exposure to drugs and communicable diseases may increase officers' wellness and anxiety levels. And so how do we deal with this as first responders? We start to become emotionally numb to what is really going on. And we have to compartmentalize and figure out a way to put this away and still be able to do our jobs effectively every day. Next slide, please. So what is trauma? We know that, I think when we think about trauma, many times we think about what trauma is for many folks is that we think it is, I just lost my slide here. We think that it is physical trauma, right? And so when somebody's traumatized, they've been physically abused or physically harmed in some way. But what we see is traumatic too, not just what we experience physically, but what we see every day. And it's part of the job for first responders, especially doctors and nurses, paramedics, police officers. And so we deal with these things repeatedly, not just once or twice. Most of the population can talk about one significant traumatic event that they've dealt with. 50 to 60% of the population has dealt with one significant traumatic event. But over the course of a 20 or 30-year career in law enforcement or another first responder type of profession, you're potentially exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of traumatic events. And so we deal with acute exposure, chronic exposure, complex exposure, and we deal with secondary or vicarious trauma, which is hearing stories or hearing people tell us about what has happened to them. And so this can also be very traumatic for us. And how do we deal with these things? And they do affect us. Next slide, please. So there are also some other stressors that lead to burnout, not just in the first responder realm, but in many environments, many work environments. We deal with organizational stressors. We deal with personal stressors. So that work-life balance that we're always trying to reach that perfect balance in handling work situations and also dealing with things that we have to take care of at home, maybe parents or children, especially COVID these days. We have police in particular have negative attitudes by the public towards the work that they do. And there's many instances where we've talked about the ability of police and communities to come together and agree to disagree, but understand how to work better together. And I think these days we've had more negative attitudes towards the work that police do by the public than we've ever had in the past, and potentially for good reasons. There's also task stressors that are intrinsic to emergency work, shift work being one of those, regular exposure to death, grief, injury, pain, risk of violence. And so how do we know if we're burning out and if we're getting to that point where we're having a hard time dealing with the stressors of our job, to the point that maybe we're dealing with that post-traumatic stress and maybe beginning to burn out? Next slide, please. So there's actually a scale. It's called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. It's a 30-point question that you can self-take, and it reflects back to experiences that you've had within the last 30 days. And so they're easy questions. They're not anything that is germane to one particular forum or another. The first question is, I am happy. And it's a Likert scale of responses from 1 being never to 5 being very often. And so you answer that question in regards to the last 30 days of your life, if you feel that you are happy. And so what this does is it measures compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, burnout, and secondary trauma exposure. So it's a good indicator for folks in the emergency services and emergency response fields to figure out kind of where they are in dealing with that fatigue or post-traumatic stress that they may be dealing as part of the jobs that they do in the field and caring for others. Next slide, please. And so how do we prevent burnout? This is specifically geared towards police officers, but it can apply to anybody. If you take the fact that it's the Asher model of wellness out of it, which was put into place by a police agency in California after one of their officers committed suicide, you can take that out and you can put anything in there, because these strategies, these components of this model of wellness apply to all of us in our daily activities. But we do know that across the United States, officers are overwhelmingly reporting that stress on the job is negatively affecting their mental health. And I think these days, with everybody that's dealing with COVID and the opioid epidemic and the other stressors of life, I think that these strategies are very relevant for folks that are just dealing with regular life stressors in addition to the other things that we're trying to juggle these days. We do know that law enforcement suicides outnumber all combined line of duty deaths, and suicides are still vastly underreported, and that police officers often do not ask for help for their mental health, because this creates a fitness for duty issue. So they kind of soldier on, they suck it up, and they get back out there and do what they're supposed to do, but they very rarely ask for help. So how do we put in place some components that can help us stay well and aware of our mental health while still being able to do the jobs that we need to do? And so this model of wellness was put into place for that specific purpose, to kind of do a self-check, if you will. And I think one of the things we can do better as a society is to create an environment where it is okay not to be okay. I think if you've talked to anybody in your neighborhood or in your social realm or coworkers, everybody's struggling. And so we all kind of try to keep it hidden, and we don't want anybody to know that we're struggling, but we need to create an environment where it's okay not to be okay, to ask folks how they're doing and to encourage people to get help if they need it. We need to focus on solutions. I think one of the things that we have done as a society is we've complained about things instead of focusing on solutions and looking at solution-based strategies instead of just sitting around and complaining. And I think one of the other things that we fail to realize is just how much we have to be thankful for. And sometimes it helps to focus on solutions and to be gracious for the things that we have, and to find one thing a day to be thankful for, because we all have a lot to be thankful for in spite of the challenges that we have right now. Some agencies, some organizations, some police departments, hospitals have done this. They've trained peers to provide support and reduce stigma by talking about their common feelings around significant events. So if they have these trained peers on staff to help folks identify what they're being stressed about and develop some strategies, at the end of the day, they can also encourage individuals to seek professional help, because there's no shame in getting help for emotional problems or emotional support when you need it, based on traumatic situations that you may have encountered either in the field, through home, or other situations that you feel you're just having a hard time coping with on your own. We know that we need to have healthy habits. And I think for many of us, emergency services specifically, we think about the 3 things that we need to do to stay healthy. And we all know that they're exercising, sleeping, and eating well, right? But I don't know about any of you in the audience, but I rarely sleep through the night. I get up at least once or twice to go to the bathroom, or my dogs bark, or something's going on. So I rarely get a good solid 8 or 10 hours sleep. I say that I exercise every day, but I really don't. And I really don't eat very well either. I do eat, but I don't eat as well as I should. So sometimes those 3 easy strategies to maintaining our wellness are not as easy to attain as we think they are. So we need to incorporate that, but we also need to give ourselves permission to disconnect from work when we're not at work, and to let go of the things that stress us out when we get home at the end of the day. And we can do that with a lot of different strategies. We can practice mindfulness, we can practice yoga, we can sing, we can dance, we can garden, we can hunt. An individual that I was presenting to a couple months ago said that at the end, he's a paramedic, at the end of his shift, he gets on his motorcycle and he goes for a motorcycle ride, and that helps him disconnect because he sees some horrible things when he's at work. Some folks find church or other spirituality that supports them. And we have to invest in our family relationships and help them understand what we do and how it affects us. We don't have to go into detail about what happens at work, but we do have to help our family members and family relationships flourish and stay invested, and understand that maybe sometimes we don't feel like talking, but this is why. And so we have to practice resiliency. And so resiliency is the ability to bounce back after a stressful situation or a situation that has somehow changed us. And by incorporating wellness strategies, we can be resilient. Resiliency is a normal phenomenon. It's not something that is a superhero strength or superhero strategy. You can be resilient if you put in place strategies to be well and find ways to disconnect and take care of your mental health. Next slide, please. And so here are some resources to read more about trauma exposure and how it affects us. I would encourage all of you to take the professional quality of life scale, because we all have jobs that stress us out, and we all have families and lives outside of work, and we try to maintain that optimal work-life balance. But these are some good strategies, some good books. The FBI has now realized that mental health is a significant concern for some of their agents, so they've required Bulletproof Spirit as part of their FBI Academy reading. But some of these are geared towards law enforcement, but PTSD is PTSD, trauma is trauma, burnout is burnout, and they all have a certain amount of, they resonate with all of us in a certain degree. The other thing that I wanted to bring your attention to is a really good book at the bottom of this list of resources, The Body Keeps the Score. And it's about our exposure to trauma and how it changes us and how it manifests physically in our bodies, not just mentally. So I don't have anything else. I tried to keep it to a normal or a manageable length. I'll be happy to take questions if anybody has questions or comments.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. And I'm glad you gave your background, because I had been trying to think for the last 2 weeks why I knew your name. And now I do. I know why.
Now you know.
I appreciated you incorporating the civilian and the officers into this also, because I agree with you, trauma is trauma. And I think it's being experienced by so many people in our country right now who are just on edge all the time. And, you know, why aren't we? We turn on the television and every single show that's on puts us a couple more steps towards that edge, because everything is, the world's going to blow up tomorrow. So,
Yeah, so one of those strategies was not watching TV. I hope everybody noticed.
no, I missed that one.
Those wellness strategies was not watching TV. So,
That's
but
interesting.
I agree, Madam Chairwoman, there are a lot of very traumatic, stressful situations that are going on in our world today. And this can be applied to just about anybody, not just first responders, but I have that unique experience. And so I know a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Thereby, why you probably don't sleep through the night, do not eat healthy, and all the other things, because you didn't do that for a good 20 years.
Right.
So, council members, questions? And of course, my cheat arm on the computer went off again.
Okay, this is Councilwoman Gray. Hi, Amy.
Councilwoman Gray, yes.
How are you, ma'am? Nice to see you.
Yep, been a long time. Well, thank you very much for this very in-depth and interesting presentation. And I used to always say, if you're a helper, if you can't take care of yourself, how do you expect to take care of other people? So I think making a point of letting people know it's okay to need help, even though they are the helpers, is very important today. So thank you, and good to see you again.
It's good to see you too, ma'am. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, Ms. Kivas. Guess my question just is, what can we do as council? What kind of programming can we implement? Do we look at augmenting officer overtime to make it more wellness activities? Do we look at healing circles in the city that I know, certain nonprofits are doing for like gun violence victims? What is the programming ask? Because I enjoyed the presentation, but I want to know what actionable steps as a city we can take to heal trauma, both in the community side and also the law enforcement side.
I think one of the unique things about law enforcement and communities is they're experiencing the same trauma, right? So the community is traumatized by the situation. The officers are going out and they're traumatized by it too. So they have a shared traumatic exposure. And I think many times just realizing that, I always say we're more alike than we are different in so many instances. And so understanding by the police that the community members are traumatized by this community violence that they're dealing with. I remember when I was an officer and thinking about the kids in the city of Wilmington that, have a shooting in a location and have to walk out their door the next day to go to their school bus or go to their, walk down the street or go out their front door, and they're seeing that. And that's very stressful for us. When we drive by the road and we see a roadside marker where somebody's had a car accident, maybe we don't always reflect, but if it's somebody we know, we certainly do. It certainly does affect us. So understanding that we have that shared trauma and realizing that and allowing that to be a healing opportunity instead of an opportunity for division, I think is something that needs to be acknowledged. I think that police are oftentimes, you'll not find a police officer who will tell you that they're stressed out or traumatized by what they deal with on the job. And I'm here to tell you that I did 25 years on the street and they are. And so what we have to do as law enforcement and everybody else too in emergency services is we have to compartmentalize and we have to figure out how to deal with that and move forward. So what we need to do is make mental health a priority for first responders. And I think healing circles are great. I personally love healing circles. I don't know how many cops you'll get to sit in a healing circle. So you have to be a little careful sometimes with how you deliver the message. And so instead of talking about compassion fatigue with cops, I talk about burnout. that's much more palatable to them. But I think there's strategies and there's ways that we can approach law enforcement about some of the trauma that they've dealt with. And I think peers are a very effective way to do that with law enforcement, to have a mental health group cadre of trained peers that understand what that trauma is and what it looks like and how it manifests, and to be there for internal support for those officers instead of them having to get to the point where they exhausted their ability to cope and then they commit suicide. That was a long answer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Keegan.
Thank you.
Councilmember Spadola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Amy. Good to see you. Are there any departments in Delaware that you would say are doing this well?
Well, I don't know.
Trying to?
I don't know if we're really doing it. What I can tell you is that I have presented to, this is a public health contract that was provided through the Overdose Data to Action Grant. And so public health had this money that they wanted to spend to identify traumatic exposures by law enforcement and other first responders. It started with law enforcement, and I've actually expanded it to a lot of different groups. But I think agencies that have asked me to come speak to their contingent of officers are the agencies that understand that it's an issue. And there's some agencies that I've presented to. I'm actually getting ready to present to Newark tomorrow. I think the agency heads who understand that this is an issue will have somebody come in and talk about mental health. And I think those are the agencies that are progressive in having an understanding of how trauma affects their officers. Because you can't just bury your head in the sand and think it doesn't happen, because it does happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think we have one more hand I see.
Okay, I can't see that. Oh,
Yes,
Mr. Congo, President
yes,
Congo.
thank you, Madam Chair. And do you think this type of training or exposure should be mandatory for officers? Like it should be almost a part of their contract?
Well, I think that, yes, I do. I think that officer mental health is something that needs to be spoken about instead of something that needs to be, is ignored. And I think there's a lot of agencies that would rather not talk about it because it tends to be a little bit of a touchy subject. So I do feel personally that mental health needs to be something that's taught in the academies. When I worked for the state, I did go out and speak to the academies on officer mental health. So yes, I do think that not just police officers, but anybody that deals with trauma, anybody who's seen a gunshot once, or suicide, or a child that's been hit by a car, or a bad car accident. We've probably all seen that. I think that's the most common shared exposure, trauma exposure for all of us, is a car accident. You never forget that image. And so cops are dealing with hundreds of thousands of these over the course of a career. And that takes a toll on them. So I do think personally that it should be something that is a part of their training, yearly training.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Can you tell me, has it been your experience when you're dealing with people of trauma, and especially people in public safety with trauma, that if they do go to their supervisors for help, does that become a black check on their record against them?
Well, I think many times what comes into question is a fitness for duty issue. And what happens with many officers is their trauma exposure affects them in different ways. And so what happens is they start doing things that they start having behaviors that call attention to something being wrong. And oftentimes what happens is the intervention is too late. So, you see, we all have, we all know officers that have gone through a number of marriages because they get traumatized, they start to feel bad. I remember when I was in the police academy, my field training officer told me that if I had a bad 3 to 11 shift and I couldn't go to sleep, to have a beer before I went to bed. That's not an effective coping strategy to try to sleep at night. So I think that there's a large misunderstanding of how trauma affects us. And I think that police officers are kind of taught that nothing affects them and they just suck it up. They have a CISM debrief, which is something that's very oftentimes called into play when officers have had a significant event. But who better than to explain what a significant event is than the person itself? We could all of us in this call could go to the same event, and we're all going to have different responses to the same event. And it's going to have different manifestations for our mental health because of what our experiences have been. So I think it's important to make officers aware that if they need to get help, that they have the permission to get help if they need it. And I don't think that many times that permission is there.
Okay, thank you. The 3rd District NPC, could you give your name, please, also for our record?
Okay, thank you very much for taking my call. My name is Jan Dennis, and I'm president of 3rd District Neighborhood Planning Council, but I'm just responding. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just calling in. I'm concerned because I'm so glad that the lady, and please forgive me, I didn't get your name, had said that it should be something mandatory for police officers to get some type of help. And to recognize it, I mean, because that can go in as a LOD. My wife's a retired DC police officer, 28 years, and I was civilian police down there for 1 year myself in DC. And I've seen a lot of that. And then I think that's mandatory in Department of Police within Metropolitan, that, officer has to come out off the street because often, and I believe that they come out with that trauma that they're suffering, and then bring that out in the street, and it kind of bleeds off into their performance. So I think making that mandatory is definitely, yes. No one likes to admit that they have a problem, but they have to. They really do have to, because like you said, also, you got home environment, then you got things that's going on in your life, and then you come to work, and then you got to deal with the public. So making that mandatory, I think it should be, because it could go down as a line of duty. I mean, I'm almost sure it could. And other than that, I think, because I've seen it, and I've seen it, and I think that it really needs to be addressed. Other than that, because I kind of wonder how many times have an officer came out on the street and really created a problem that didn't need to be escalated, because they don't want to admit that they are burnt out or have a struggle of some sort. So that is it, and I'm glad you said that. It really kind of lightens things up, and I hope that they can really get that kind of training. I mean, get that kind of help. They really do. All right, so that's it. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't want to confuse. I think officers should be encouraged to get help if they need help. But I don't think that and I think that the training should be something that is incorporated into police academies, but I don't think that officers should be mandated to get help. I think first we need to have a conversation about mental health, and officers need to understand, not just officers, for anybody. I just presented to a bunch of lawyers for the Delaware State Bar Association, and I was amazed at how many of them said that they had traumas that they were experiencing as dealing with their clients. So I think talking about mental health is something that we need to do more of with first responders and certainly police. Because I don't think we talk about it. So thank you for your comment, sir.
Keandra McDowell.
Hello, yes, thank you for just coming on here tonight and giving us your presentation. Since since I was younger, being in the community, I always said that any family that had to go through a loved one being traumatized, like being shot or killed in our city, that it should be like something that is offered for a free service through our city for that family to get counseling. I am somebody who had to deal with that, and it does bother you, and it does do a lot to you mentally, and to carry it all the time and then be constantly reminded every time someone else gets shot. It just adds more trauma to the situation. So thank you for like highlighting on that and the importance of it, that it's okay. Just because you're having a mental health issue doesn't mean that you're crazy or this is the end of the world. It's normal. Ask for help, get help, seek help. That's all I have to say, and thank you.
Thank
you. Council members. Any other members of the audience?
Chairwoman Walsh, we do have Bonnie Mills, who just raised her hand for public comment.
Bonnie Mills?
Yes.
Hi, I have my hand in error.
I'm sorry?
I raised my hand by mistake. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anyone else?
No further public comment, Madam Chair.
I'm trying to raise my hand. I'm sorry. I couldn't. This is Councilwoman Fields. I'm sorry. I was trying to raise my hand. Can I speak, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I got the end part of the mental health. And I think it is a good idea that the police, they do utilize it, and not just for them, but it will also help them deal with others out there in the community that have mental issues. It's going to help them be able to cope with them on, having conversations, how to calm them down, because, they kind of know what they're coping with what their mental status is. So I think it's a win-win as an overall if, those first responders, whether it be a police officer, a firefighter, EMT, those type of people, if they were to engage in some type of mental counseling, mental health counseling, I just think that it would be beneficial as an all around thing. And also both of my daughters had experienced a young man being shot in his head in my back alley. And that took a lot from my daughters. So I did take them to counseling. And, that's something that they seen out the window. They heard it, they seen it and everything. So, it does take time. And you as a parent or a community person, you have to continuously engage in it and ask questions. So I really think that this is a good idea. And I just hope that the Wilmington Police Department does pick this up and offer it to those. And I hope that the first responders take it, what's being offered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I just wanted to quickly just comment, a couple of people have said this. You cannot be an effective caretaker if you're not healthy, physically or mentally. So I think that is something that a couple of people have said, and I agree with that. And I wanted to bring attention to that. You have to be mentally and physically healthy to be able to do a job the right way, right?
Yep. Okay, Amy, we really do appreciate the time. You're taking the time to come and present this to us. And you do have contact stuff in here, don't you?
My contact information is on the last slide. I think I included that. So feel free to reach out to me. My phone number and my email are there if anybody would like to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer questions or have a conversation. So thank you all very much again for inviting me tonight.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Happy New Year to you also.
Thank you. You too.
To everyone. Okay, we have one more presentation that has to be, doesn't have to be, but is being made this evening. And this is a presentation on community empowerment centered policing reform.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, could you please say where you're from and who you are?
Yes,
And
most
just
definitely.
real short, what your company does.
Oh, okay. I was actually gonna. I have that included in my presentation.
That's
So should I
fine.
just start? Okay.
Well, at least tell us who you are before you start the presentation.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. So my name is Carlton T. Mayers II, Esquire. I'm a national policing reform expert and consultant. I'll give you some information on my background during the presentation itself.
Sure.
Just let me know when to start. I'm gonna turn off my camera so you can focus on the slides, but just let me know when to start.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so good evening, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today about community empowerment-centered policing reform. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I used to direct NAACP National Office's Criminal Justice Reform Program when Ben Jealous was president and when Cornell William Brooks was president. While in that role, I co-authored NAACP National's Born Suspect, Ending Racial Profiling report that was published in 2014 and includes information on how to end racial profiling by law enforcement on the state and local levels. After that, I transitioned to NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where I worked under the leadership of Sherilyn Eiffel, and I was the policy counsel for the Policing Reform Campaign, did a lot of work in Ferguson, Missouri and Baltimore, Maryland on both of their consent decrees. I also worked on the Eric Gardner case in New York City and the Walter Scott case in North Charleston, South Carolina. And on behalf of Legal Defense Fund, I worked with the Obama administration on the 21st Century Policing Task Force report recommendations and other White House initiatives on policing reform. So now, through my consulting company, Mayor Strategic Solutions, LLC, I work with communities across the country on reimagining public safety through an approach that I developed and informed by my years of experience as a community lawyer called Community Empowerment-Centered Policing Reform by the CAP method, which stands for C for Community Empowerment, A for Accountability, and T for Transparency. The CAP method empowers communities to change law enforcement policies, practices, and culture in order to eradicate police misconduct and establish sustainable and long-standing policing reforms through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. Next. And so something that we do know is that according to a sociological study that was published in 2016, immediately following, more than a year after the highly publicized assault or death of a Black person at the hands of law enforcement, Black Americans are less likely to dial 911. We also know that data from mappingpoliceviolence.com has shown that law enforcement have killed on average about 1,000 persons per year since 2015. And even though Black people only make up 13% of the overall US population, Black people represent 28%. That's almost a third of those killed by law enforcement since 2013. In fact, Black men are about 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than white men. And Black women are about 1.4 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than white women. Ultimately, all of this demonstrates that not ensuring police accountability does not support public safety. Next slide. So now that leads us to what are these solutions? Well, like I mentioned earlier, I work with communities around the country on reimagining public safety through community empowerment-centered policing reform. And the vehicle for community empowerment-centered policing reform is the CAP method. And as you could see here on the slide, the CAP method consists of 3 components. Each component must be achieved in order for the CAP method to be successful. The first component is community empowerment, and this entails community members, especially those from neighborhoods and zip codes where there's high levels of negative police interactions, like racial profiling, excessive use of force, etc. Those community members especially need to be involved in, need to have knowledge of, and need to have at least 50% voting power. I'm gonna repeat that, at least 50% voting power over all police activities that are directly related to police-civilian interactions, like stops, uses of force, surveillance technology, the way protests are handled, etc. The next component is accountability, and this involves creating an inhospitable environment for law enforcement officers who engage in misconduct by establishing both internal and external accountability mechanisms that would work together. So when I say an internal accountability mechanism, I mean one that's within a law enforcement agency, like an early warning system that allows supervisors to monitor the conduct of rank and file officers, to make sure that they're adhering to departmental policies and trainings. And if they're not, to then intervene through remedial training and or counseling, which I think actually ties into the previous presentation, talking about what to do about officers who are going through trauma and mental health. Well, that's what we're talking about here, accountability, and what is it that can be done to provide them support. And if they are going to continue to engage in misconduct, to then hold them accountable. Like I said, an early warning system is one way to do that internally within police departments, because once the supervisors have provided the remedial training and or counseling, and if the officer still engages in misconduct, those supervisors now can advance disciplinary action that could result in the suspension or termination of the officer. And that's accountability. Now, when we talk about accountability mechanisms that are outside of the law enforcement agency, those are like external accountability mechanisms. That's a good example of that, is like a civilian complaint review board that has both subpoena powers and disciplinary powers. And so this would be a board that would be staffed only by civilians and would be tasked with receiving complaints of law enforcement misconduct from other civilians, and would have the power to subpoena anyone or any materials related to the complaint for its investigation. And as a result of its investigation, if it finds that the officer did engage in misconduct, it will then have the power to advance disciplinary action that could result in the suspension or termination of the officer. Now, the last component is transparency. Now, typically transparency is defined as law enforcement agencies being above board with their community members about their policing activities. A good example is public reporting of traffic stop data, public reporting of use of force data, etc. I actually define transparency more broadly as the interconnectedness and coordination amongst the four aspects of what I call the four aspects of the community you're going to see on the next slide. So next. So first we have law enforcement. This includes the sheriff's office, state and local police, etc. Then we have elected and appointed government officials. This also includes government agencies. Then we have community members. This includes community-based organizations, direct service providers, directly impacted individuals, and local businesses. And then last, we have the local press and news media. Now, according to my definition of transparency, all four of these aspects of the community would work together through interconnectedness and coordination as one community to support public safety and ensure police accountability through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. Next. So now what I'd like to do for you is just kind of talk about some of the successes that I've had on advancing community empowerment-centered policing reform recently throughout the country. So last year, we all know there were more than 30 states that passed policing reform legislation into law. I worked with lawmakers in 5 of those states, one of those states being Illinois. Illinois passed the Safety Act, which is its criminal justice reform law. I worked with some of the lawmakers you see in this picture I worked with, but I worked with them on the policing reform language within this law. Now, one of the provisions I want to just quickly talk about with you that I think speaks to community empowerment and also ties into the previous discussion about mental health has to do with crisis intervention techniques trainings. These are mandatory trainings for in-service officers and new recruits having to do with training officers on how do you respond when somebody in the community is in crisis due to mental health needs, due to substance abuse needs, addiction, etc. That's what this training focuses on. So now under the law that I worked on with lawmakers in Illinois, it now states that for this training, this mandatory training, it shall be conducted in collaboration among law enforcement professionals, mental health providers, families of people in the community who have mental health needs, and advocates. And the training has to include the experiences of the families in the community of people with mental health needs. Now, this is a big deal for a lot of reasons, but what I want to emphasize with you today is when we talk about proactively strategizing on how to address public safety, I think this is a really good example of how you bring together the stakeholders of an in-crisis situation, being law enforcement, mental health providers, families, and advocates to come together to proactively strategize how do we want our law enforcement to respond to these situations in our community, right? I mean, we already know every state has different communities, but how do you want your community to respond to this situation, your law enforcement in your community to respond to this situation? This training is requiring that they come together to do that. I think this is excellent, and I hope to see this replicated on the state and local levels throughout the country. Next slide. Now, in regards to what I've been doing locally, in regards to accomplishments and successes, I'm currently contracted with the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to work with Milwaukee Police Department, elected government, local government officials, and community-based organizations on putting together a community police engagement plan that will address curbing gun violence in Black and brown communities and police accountability together in one plan, all of it grounded in community empowerment centered policing reform, so that directly impacted community members can now be substantively involved in the decision making on hiring and promotion of law enforcement, discipline, development of policies, etc. So we now have a 30-page document. Milwaukee PD is drafted reflecting that. We're now going to move forward with that with the community. And then in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I've been working with ACLU and NAACP on some recent successes around making changes to the administrative policy / ordinance that governs the purchase and use of surveillance technologies by all city entities, including law enforcement. So now community members are able to be substantively involved in the decision-making on purchasing and using surveillance technology, and also requiring that data related to the impact on the use of the surveillance technology has to be published on the city's website annually. And that data has to include information on like civil rights violations from the use of the surveillance technology, broken down by race, gender, age, and location, complaints filed against the use of the surveillance technology, broken down by race, gender, age, and location, and also having a mandatory public comment period so that members of the community can provide their feedback on the data and have it on the record. All of that is important for community empowerment and accountability. And then last, in Kalamazoo County, Michigan, had a recent success there working with the Public Defender's Office and community-based organizations on drafting and getting passed a resolution creating an open database that will populate all arrests, indictments, plea deals, convictions, and sentencing for Kalamazoo County, broken down by race, gender, age, and location. Also creating an advisory committee that consists of community members that will be tasked with working with the prosecutor's office and with the county commission on implementing this resolution. Next slide. And so now to wrap it up, this is the what, my company's consulting services for state and local legislative and grassroots advocacy. All of this done through the CAP method I detailed earlier. Next slide. And then last but not least, this is the how, my contact information. empower@mayorsolutions.com. You could also reach me, Carlton T. Mayors II Esquire on LinkedIn. My company's website will be up this week. That's another way you can reach me. So thank you, and please do keep in touch.
Thank you. Council members, does anyone have any questions or comments?
Chairwoman Walsh, we have a few council members with hands up. Councilmember Johnson, Gray, and Councilmember Darby.
Okay, Councilmember Darby.
Yes, thank you. I want to say thank you, Mr. Carlton, for coming and giving this presentation. This is exactly what we need for the city of Wilmington. It's police reform, police accountability, community-centered engagements and activities. So I urge the council, I know that Mr. Carlton has been meeting with some of the staff and other council people on trying to come up with a plan on where you can start within the city of Wilmington to talk about police reform, to talk about building trust with our police department, to talk about police accountability and what that looks like for our city. And I want to say thank you for your presentation. And I know that, and I hope that the rest of city council, the members love what you presented tonight. and that we're able to move forward and find funding to be able to have you come and be a consultant for the city, to be able to give us the reform and give the citizens what they need when it comes to public safety, because we don't have it right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Councilwoman Darby basically said what I was going to say. I thank you for the presentation, and I wasn't clear, but she said you are a consulting company, and my understanding is that you would come in and organize these, your points, or try to organize. Is that what you would do?
So what I would do is, number one, I help, if it be elected government officials, if it be community members, I do a lot of work with law enforcement. So I just want to put that out there as well. What I do is I come in and I help with identifying solutions. So I'm all about solutions. You know, I'm the kind of person you bring in when you're ready to start identifying, strategizing, and implementing solutions. If you're still in the phase of trying to figure out what the problems are, I can help on that. But where I'm really working, as I laid out earlier, in the different localities I'm currently, or I've been doing work in, I'm really focused on solutions and how can we break down the silos with law enforcement, community members, elected and appointed government officials, and the news media, so everybody's coming together to support public safety instead of pointing fingers at each other. Because I do believe, in my opinion, that's one reason why we're seeing an uptick in a lot of violent crimes, is because community members and law enforcement are not working well together. And the only way to get them to do that is to break down those silos. And so that's what I focus on doing, is how can we break down those silos based on the circumstances of your situation, and then looking at national evidence-based, state-based, and local-based best practices for guidance on how to do that, custom tailoring it for your locality.
Thank you. Sounds great. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, Mr. Myers, I really appreciate you taking the time this evening to speak with us, as I know you, a few weeks ago, we spoke one-on-one, and I know with Councilmember Darby and some others, just talking about what you offer our city. And I just appreciate the comprehensive overview and the approach that you take, that about not pointing fingers, about that, you know, each part, the community and the police have a role in public safety. And we all need to step up and make sure it happens. So I really appreciate that. And I know you did float around some numbers and proposals. So, you know, that's more the brass tacks of things. But I'm hoping we are able to potentially find the funding in order to bring assistance to the table, as long as the rest of council sees what I see, that this is a pragmatic solution. And so we're not just blindly going in the dark, you know, and struggling as a city as we've done. That we're looking at having community-centered solutions with a community drives as well. So I thank you for your experience, and I definitely look forward to hopefully, you know, working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Councilmember Oliver, did you have your hand up? Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Council President, I did not see it.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Just like my colleagues, I just want to thank you, Mr. Myers, for your presentation and for your willingness to come to our city. I hope that we are wise enough and humble enough as a city and as an administration, as a police department and a community to welcome you with open arms and see how we can just be a better city when it comes to public safety. So I'm definitely looking forward to working with you. And again, just I thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members who have anything? Any members of the public? Could someone let me know on this, because I see nothing?
Yes, there's a couple.
Kendra McDowell.
Yes, how are you doing, everyone? Again, it's Kendra McDowell. I would just like to say thank you, Mr. Myers, for even just taking the time to come out and present us the presentation. This is exactly what we need. He explained everything in detail. And this is what our city needs, not even just the people, the police too, because I hear constantly everyone saying that talk about community and policing. Well, he is here explaining to us that we need to stop pointing fingers and just figure out a solution and figure it out. I am one of them who sits around and point fingers. I just want this stuff, like something put in place that we can start working together to fix Wilmington right now, because it's a mess. I just want to say thank you, and I hope that everyone on council or whoever we need to get the funds to make this possible, I hope that this is like #1 priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? All right, Steve.
Madam Chair, we have Angeline.
I'm sorry, who?
Angeline.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Angeline Fraser Giles, and I'm a resident here in Milford, Delaware. And I want to thank Carlton for his presentation. I know Carlton from days of working on these issues out of DC. And I would highly recommend you guys trying to figure out a way to bring him in. I have two questions. I guess one is, because this is Wilmington and I live in Milford, you know, we have a smaller population here, of course, a smaller police department, but I'm just curious as to whether council have been looking at other areas around the state and if there's a way to incorporate this statewide as opposed to just in Wilmington. I understand that there are problems that have occurred in Wilmington, but I can only imagine that there are other problems in other areas of the state. And so that's the first question. And then to Carlton specifically, you laid out this great plan and you have had success in some of these other jurisdictions. I'm just curious as to, you talk about the solutions and that you can kind of help folks with the problems, but if you're working more towards solutions, you are coming in expecting the council, the cities to know what the problems are. And is there a way that you go about, if you're not doing that part of it, like how you suggest that the council or the city comes up with the problems? I mean, the problems are out there, like there's a plethora of them, right? On the community side as well as the law enforcement side. So I'm just curious as to how you look at that.
Yeah, definitely. I can answer the second question. I think the first one, it seems like might have to go to city council. Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So real quick on the second question, in regards to identifying problems, the experience I've had doing this, and especially North Charleston, South Carolina, where legal defense when I was working there, we had done our own pattern of practice investigation of the North Charleston Police Department. We held at least 4 town hall meetings in North Charleston, South Carolina, I would say over a period of 6 months, where we allowed community members to come out. We invited law enforcement, at least at 2 of the meetings. They never showed up. I think they showed up to the last one. They didn't show up to the other 3. But it was really an event that was for community members to be able to go on the microphone in front of their colleagues and just for 3 minutes talk about what they think their negative experience was with their police department. And we also had a stenographer who was on site that we paid to record all of that information so that there was an actual document in writing of what people were saying in the community were the issues according to them. And then we used that in addition to our own research and assessment that we did of the police department procedures, policies, police union contract provisions, everything that's related to their policies. And then we cross-referenced all that information to determine what we felt based on our analysis were the issues that were coming up internally and externally with the North Charleston Police Department. So that is something that, I mean, of course I can do that, but I know a lot of times because of 2020's protests, it seemed like a lot of communities that protested around the country, they seem to already know what the problems are, but the issue that they're stuck in right now is what are the solutions? And then even if we know what the solutions are, how do we implement the solutions so that we bring about the change we want to see? And so that's why I really emphasize that, because I feel like that's an area that still needs a lot more support around the country, is the solutions. How do we identify, strategize, and implement them for the change we want to see?
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if city councils are going to do this in other parts of the state, but I'm definitely open to, working with other lawmakers as well on this, even in other parts of Delaware. But I'm just all about breaking down those barriers. Let's start addressing public safety and police accountability together.
Well, I would love to get the city council to invite you here in Milford. One of the city council members is a neighbor 2 doors down. So I will talk with him and ask him if he would like you to present, or ask the city council for your presentation. Because I think working globally throughout the state is going to be what gets us to where we need to be as a whole, as opposed to piecemealing it in one county.
Thank you.
If I may, yes. Wilmington City Council is going to be concentrating on Wilmington City Council for right now. So I do thank you for your time. I don't see any other council members with comments.
We, Madam Chair, we do have a J. Renee, if I'm saying the last name correctly, from the public.
Okay, all I want to say is I, as a courtesy, because the lady before was calling from downstate and has obviously never called here before, when presentations are being given, you have your time to give them, and answers are directed to council members. They're really, the questions that council ask are the ones that you respond to. Okay. So if we may, what was the name again, Daniel?
J. Renee.
Yes, hello. Most of the things that I was going to speak about have been addressed since I've had my hand up. But so I'll just reaffirm that I definitely believe that training is very, very important. How we get better at our job, as we get better at the things that we're trying to achieve, sometimes we need training. When I was in the military, training was something that we use as a tool to get better at the things that we were trying to get better at. And it was very, very useful. I wanted to also make a comment when we were talking about the first responders. In the military, one of the things we did, everyone was a service member, but some people had additional duties. And someone that's going to be a first responder, if it does have to be a police officer, maybe that could be an additional duty. And something that comes along with having an additional duty is additional training. So I know that there was a question of it being mandatory. I think that for it to be very successful, it would be smart to have mandatory training for those that we're going to designate for that job. And we can have a certain amount of people that will be their additional duties. And that can be something that they focus on. That way they can have effective training to be effective in those situations, so problems don't arise where people can get hurt or can die. When it comes to the last presentation that we had, I've had the privilege to seeing this in its entirety, and I think that it would be extremely beneficial for all of those involved for that to be something that we pick up. If the police force and the community is really serious about combating problems and issues that we have, I think that when good training comes, it should be definitely something that we can consider. In the military, something we would always say is train how you fight and train how you serve. So if these training tools are starting to be implemented, it will only make sense that it will continue to serve a good purpose, because we're training how to do it right. So I believe that any training that we see that can be beneficial to combat these problems are important to consider. That way we don't have later on people that are in a position to say that lack of training is the reason why things went wrong, people were hurt, or people were murdered or killed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay, Mr. Myers, thank you. I understand you're going to be speaking with council members individually and already have spoken to some. So we all look forward to meeting you and in person, and also thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Chair Walsh. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to all the city councilors.
Okay.
One
yeah.
last comment to Mr.
Oh,
Myers,
yep.
Mr. Mayers.
Councilmember Gray.
Thank you. That you really sold me when you discussed town hall meetings. That's something that I and some other council members have thought for a long time. There needed to be a forum so that I call it venting, so that everyone can just come out and vent. A lot of people just want to be heard. They want to know that they're being taken seriously. And sometimes that's the end of it, once they express themselves and get it out. So I've been advocating that for a long time. So it's great to hear that is part of, if we decide on it, a part of realizing what your problem is, or what is the problem that people want to work on. Thank you very much.
And are you going to do a motion to adjourn?
Yes, motion to adjourn.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who participated. Good night.
Thank you.
And
Good
Happy
night.
New Year to all.
Take care, everyone.
Right.